Hi friends, it's Jasmine, your Vancouver, Washington Realtor extraordinaire. I help people buy and sell homes all over Southwest Washington and the Portland Metro. And if you're planning your move, reach out. Call me, text me, email me, whatever's easiest for you. I work with a lot of folks who are navigating big transitions, and I'd love to help guide you through yours too. Because today, I'm sharing something a little different, something that's really close to my heart. We're talking about homelessness. Not just in general, but here in Vancouver, Washington. And not just from a distance, but from my own experience. I grew up right on the edge of housing insecurity. My dad was homeless for several years while I was growing up, and I've had other loved ones go through it more recently too, all for different reasons. Some related to mental health, some just the brutal math of survival in today's economy. So if you've ever looked at someone holding a cardboard sign and thought, how did they end up there? Or if you've ever wondered what homelessness really looks like in our community, this video is for you. We're going to talk about the reality, the root causes, the myths, the nonprofits doing amazing work here in Vancouver, and how each of us can show up with a little more compassion. Let's get into it. This isn't just a topic I care about in theory. Homelessness has been a big part of my life in a very real, very personal way. Growing up, my family lived in a 400 square foot, one-bedroom apartment. My mom and brother shared the bedroom, my mom had a twin-size bed, and my brother slept on one of those fold-up futon cushions on the floor. I slept in the living room on the couch. That was our setup all the way until I turned 18. We didn't have a lot, but it was home, and we were grateful for it. At the same time, we were always one unexpected bill or one missed paycheck away from losing it. My mom was a single parent, and she worked incredibly hard, but the margin was razor thin. We lived with that pressure every day. And my dad, he actually did lose his housing. My parents were divorced, and from the time I was in 7th grade through my junior year of high school, my dad was homeless. He lived on the streets for years, not because he didn't care or didn't want to work, but because life had unraveled for him. Eventually, he got help through the state and qualified for Section 8 housing, but for a long time, he didn't have anywhere to go. So, when I think about homelessness, I don't think of it as other. I think of my family. I think of what could have happened if just one thing had gone wrong. I think of what it means to grow up in survival mode and how early I understood that housing was something you could lose even when you were trying your best. And now, all these years later, I'm in a completely different chapter. I help people find homes for a living. I get to hand over keys, walk people through new front doors, help families settle into their next season. And sometimes that contrast is surreal because I'll never forget where I came from. I'll never forget that couch, and I'll never stop believing that everyone deserves a place to feel safe, a place to rest, a place to call home. That's why I'm making this video, because if we can tell the truth about homelessness, maybe we can start seeing people differently. Maybe we can shift how we respond, not with judgment, but with compassion. I've always had a soft spot for the homeless, and I think that's because I've always been close to it. I still remember doing a school project on homelessness in the 8th grade. While my classmates were making posters about pollution or endangered animals, I was trying to understand how people ended up on the streets, what resources were available to help them, and why it felt like so many people were being left behind. At the time, my dad was homeless, so it wasn't just a class assignment. It was personal. That experience shaped how I saw the world and how I still see it. I never really believed the stereotypes. I never thought homelessness was just about laziness or bad decisions. I knew, even back then, that it was more complicated than that. That sometimes people are just trying their best with the cards they've been dealt, and those cards don't always include stability or support or a second chance. More recently, someone else in my family went through a mental health crisis and ended up homeless for about 6 months. It was heartbreaking to watch. They weren't using drugs, they weren't out partying, they were just sick, overwhelmed, and unable to navigate the system on their own. And without support, things fell apart. They're doing better now, thankfully, but it reminded me how fragile life can be and how quickly someone can go from doing okay to losing everything. That's why I always try to lead with compassion. Yes, there are people who are struggling with addiction. Yes, there are folks who seem rough around the edges, but I've also met some of the kindest, most generous people who are living in tents or sleeping in their cars or trying to hold it together at a bus stop. We never know the full story, and honestly, it costs nothing to be kind. When people think of homelessness, they usually picture big cities, tent encampments, sidewalks lined with makeshift shelters, people panhandling on every corner. But here in Vancouver, it looks different. You don't see massive encampments in most neighborhoods. You're not going to see rows and rows of tents downtown. In fact, a lot of the homelessness here is hidden. You'll see folks standing near freeway on-ramps with cardboard signs asking for help. You might notice someone sleeping on a bench or tucked away behind a building downtown. But a lot large portion of people experiencing homelessness in Vancouver are doing everything they can to not be visible. They're living in their cars, they're couch surfing, they're bouncing between shelters, friends' garages, or motels, just trying to stay off the radar while they figure things out. And that's something I think a lot of people misunderstand. Homelessness doesn't always look like we expect. It's not always obvious. In fact, some of the people you see every day working at gas stations, sitting next to you on the bus, even checking out groceries, may be unhoused or living in extremely unstable conditions. Clark County estimates that over 1,200 people are currently experiencing homelessness, and that includes families with children, teens who've aged out of foster care, seniors on fixed incomes, and veterans who've fallen through the cracks. Some are in shelters, some are in transitional housing, but many are still sleeping outside, even during cold, wet Washington winters. We also have safe stay communities here, which are city-supported transitional shelters made up of modular tiny homes. They're staffed 24/7, and they offer basic amenities like laundry, showers, security, and connection to social services. These are good options for some folks, but space is limited, and not everyone qualifies or feels safe enough entering structured programs. The truth is, Vancouver isn't overrun, but homelessness is still very much present. It just takes on different forms depending on where you look. And unless we're paying attention, it's easy to pretend it's not happening. But it is, and these are our neighbors. When people say, well, why don't they just get housing? It sounds simple, but the truth is, the system makes it incredibly difficult. There are so many barriers stacked on top of each other that even the most motivated person can get stuck. Here's what that looks like in real life. The first step for someone who loses housing is often an emergency shelter. But shelters in Clark County are limited, and they fill up fast. Some serve only men, some serve women or families, some have strict rules. So if you don't meet the criteria, or if beds are already full, you're back outside. If you do get into a shelter, it's usually short term, 90 days, maybe 6 months if you're lucky. From there, the goal is to transition into something more stable, like supportive housing or an affordable apartment. But that's where the bottleneck begins. Section 8 vouchers, for example, are supposed to be a lifeline. They cover a portion of your rent so you can afford a safe place to live. But the wait list in our area can be years long. And even if you do get a voucher, it doesn't guarantee housing. You still have to find a landlord willing to accept it. In a competitive market like Vancouver, with rising rents and low vacancy rates, landlords often choose tenants with perfect credit and stable income over someone with a voucher. So many vouchers actually expire before people can use them. Affordable housing is another missing piece. There simply aren't enough units being built to keep up with demand. For every new development, there are hundreds of people applying. Families, seniors, veterans, all competing for the same handful of opportunities. And when the supply is that low, people fall through the cracks. Then there's the practical side. To rent a place, most landlords require first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. In Vancouver, that can easily add up to $4,000 or $5,000 just to move in. For someone living paycheck to paycheck or trying to rebuild after losing everything, that's nearly impossible to come up with. And that's before you factor in other challenges: lost IDs, unpaid utility bills, an old eviction on your record, or a gap in rental history. Each one of those can disqualify you from housing opportunities, even if you're working and trying your best. So when people are stuck, it's not usually because they're unwilling to try. It's because every door they knock on is locked, or it comes with a list of requirements they just can't meet. The shelter can't keep them forever, the voucher waitlist is years long, the affordable housing units don't exist, and the private rental market is out of reach. That's the bottleneck. Not enough exits, not enough options, not enough safety nets. And it's why people who desperately want stability often end up cycling between shelters, tents, cars, and temporary fixes. Not because they don't want a home, but because the system makes it so hard to get one. We've spent a lot of time talking about the challenges and the bottlenecks, but I also want to highlight the resources that do exist right here in Vancouver and Clark County. Because while the system isn't perfect, there are organizations working every single day to provide safety, shelter, and stability for those who need it most. The first place to start is the Council for the Homeless. They run the housing hotline. That number is 360-695-9677, and it's the single entry point for most housing and shelter services in Clark County. When you call, staff can connect you to open shelter beds, rental assistance, housing vouchers, and sometimes even immediate crisis support. They're also the group that maintains the county's real-time data on homelessness, so they have the clearest picture of available resources on any given day. For families, one of the most important resources is Open House Ministries. They're a faith-based traditional shelter that provides housing for parents and children together. And what makes them special is that it's not just about having a roof overhead. They provide counseling, parenting classes, financial literacy training, and personalized case management. Every night, more than 100 residents, many of them kids, have a safe place to sleep there, and the goal is always long-term stability. Share Vancouver is another cornerstone in our community. They operate multiple shelters across the city. Share House downtown, which provides emergency shelter for single men. Share Orchards Inn, which supports families and single women. Share Homestead, which serves those in crisis with temporary shelter. They also coordinate the Winter Hospitality Overflow program, which partners with local churches to open extra shelter beds during the coldest months of the year. And beyond shelter, Share runs a hot meal program serving thousands of meals each month, as well as a robust food pantry. For many, Share is the bridge between immediate survival and long-term stability. Another unique nonprofit is Outsiders Inn. They're peer-led, meaning many of their staff has personal experience with homelessness themselves. That makes them especially effective in reaching people who might not feel comfortable going into traditional shelters. Outsiders Inn provides low-barrier shelter options, street outreach through programs like Project Hope, a mail service so people have addresses to receive benefits or apply for jobs, and one-on-one peer support to help people stabilize their lives. Sometimes just having someone who's been there can make all the difference. On the city side, Vancouver has invested in several safe stay communities. These are small villages of modular shelters, think tiny homes, where people can live temporarily in a safer, more private environment than a tent. Each site has bathrooms, showers, laundry, is pet-friendly, and is staffed 24/7. They're operated by nonprofits like Outsiders Inn and Live Love Outreach, and they provide stability while connecting residents to longer-term housing solutions. The goal is dignity, safety, and a stepping stone forward. Beyond housing, there are also day centers and outreach programs, places where people can shower, do laundry, use a computer, or simply rest indoors for a few hours. For someone living outside, those basic services, a hot meal, a safe place to sit, a place to charge your phone, can restore a sense of humanity. Now, I also want to mention healthcare resources because homelessness and health are so connected. Clark County has federally qualified health centers like CMAR and other clinics that offer sliding scale medical and behavioral health services. Mental health and substance use support are available too, but there are wait lists, which is why community support and advocacy are so critical. So what can we do? If you're watching this and wondering, how can I help? Here are a few ideas. Donate socks, blankets, and hygiene kits. These are always in high demand. Volunteer at Share to serve meals or help with childcare. Collect shelf-stable food for Open House Ministries or the Council for the Homeless. Offer financial support. Even small donations go directly towards housing assistance and services. And maybe, most importantly, shift how you engage. Smile, say hello, acknowledge people. A little compassion can go a long way because at the end of the day, these organizations can't solve the crisis alone. They need volunteers, donors, advocates, and neighbors willing to see the humanity in people who are struggling. So if you've ever felt helpless when you've seen someone on a street corner, this is where you can start. These are the groups already doing the hard work, and they need all of us behind them. After growing up the way I did, on the edge of housing insecurity, with my dad unhoused and my family barely scraping by, it feels surreal that I now work in real estate. Every day, I get to hand over keys, walk families through their new front doors, and celebrate milestones that once felt completely out of reach for me. And honestly, that contrast is something I think about all the time. On one hand, I feel so grateful. I get to be part of some of the happiest moments in people's lives. I get to see the relief in their faces when they finally close on a home. And for families who are relocating to Vancouver or Portland, I get to help them build something stable from the start. That's an honor. But there's also this quiet, constant awareness in the back of my mind that not everyone gets this chance. That while I'm helping one client close on their dream home, there are still hundreds of people in my community who don't even have a safe place to sleep at night. Sometimes that weighs heavy. That's part of why this work feels so rewarding. Because for me, It's not just about the transaction, it's about what a home represents. Safety, stability, dignity, all the things I grew up understanding were fragile. Every time I help a client find a home, I'm reminded of what a gift it is to have one, and I don't take that lightly. It's also why I try to give back whenever I can. I donate food and supplies to shelters. I support nonprofits that are fighting homelessness here in Vancouver, because real estate isn't just about square footage and price per foot, it's about people, and everyone deserves a place where they feel safe, even if their journey to get there looks different than mine. So yes, sometimes I feel that tension between the joy of helping my clients and the heartbreak of knowing how many people are left out of the system. But instead of letting it discourage me, I try to let it fuel me, because every home sold is a reminder of what's possible. And every act of kindness, every bit of support we extend to someone without housing is a step closer to a more compassionate community. One of the biggest barriers to solving homelessness isn't just funding or housing units. It's the way people think about homelessness. The stereotypes, the assumptions, the myths, and I think it's important to name a few of those head on. The first myth is, people are homeless because they're lazy and don't want to work. The truth? Many people who are homeless are working. They're stocking shelves at grocery stores, they're doing landscaping, they're working food service, but when rent for a modest one-bedroom in Vancouver is over $1,500 a month, a minimum wage job doesn't even come close to covering it. You can work full-time and still not be able to afford housing here. Laziness isn't the issue, the math is. Another common myth is homelessness is just about drugs and addiction. Yes, substance abuse is a factor for some, but it's usually a symptom, not the cause. Trauma, untreated mental illness, or losing stable housing often come first, and people turn to substances as a way to cope. Not everyone who is homeless uses drugs, and even for those who do, they're still human beings who deserve compassion and care. A third myth is they chose this lifestyle. I've heard people say, well, they could just go to a shelter if they really wanted to, but that ignores the barriers we just talked about earlier. Shelters are often full, have strict rules, or don't allow partners, pets, or possessions. For many people, sleeping outside with their loved ones feels safer than being separated. It's not about choosing the streets, it's about the lack of real choices. And finally, there's the idea that they're dangerous. But statistically, people experiencing homelessness are far more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators of it. Living outside makes you incredibly vulnerable, and the majority of folks just want to be left in peace, or better yet, given a chance to rebuild. The reality is, homelessness is complicated. It's about housing costs, health care, wages, mental health, and sometimes sheer bad luck. And reducing it to stereotypes only makes it harder to fix. If there's one takeaway I'd want people to remember, it's this. Homelessness doesn't define someone's character. It's a circumstance, one that any of us could face if life threw enough curveballs. And the most powerful thing we can offer in response is compassion, not judgment. So now that we've talked about what homelessness looks like, why it happens, and the myths that surround it, the question becomes, what can we do? Let's start with those of us who are housed. Neighbors, community members, people who want to help but don't always know how to. The truth is, small actions matter. Donating socks, blankets, or hygiene kits go a long way. These items seem simple, but they're always in short supply, especially in the winter. Volunteering a few hours at a shelter or a meal program can make a real impact. Serving food, helping with childcare, or even just sitting and talking with someone. It all counts. Financial donations are powerful too. Nonprofits like Council for the Homeless, Share, and Open House Ministries stretch every dollar into housing assistance, meals, and direct services. Even $20 can mean a night indoors for someone. And finally, advocacy matters. Showing up to city council meetings, supporting affordable housing initiatives, and speaking up when you hear harmful stereotypes, that's how we change the bigger system. And maybe the simplest action of all, just acknowledge people. Smile, say hello, make eye contact. Being treated with dignity, even in a small way, reminds people that they're still part of the community. Now, if you happen to be watching this and you're experiencing homelessness yourself, first, I just want to say, you are not invisible. You are not forgotten, and there are places here in Vancouver where you can find support. The Council for the Homeless Housing Hotline at 360-695-9677 is the central entry point for shelter and housing resources in Clark County. They can tell you what beds are available and what programs you might qualify for. Share Vancouver provides emergency shelters, meals, and a winter overflow program. Open House Ministries is there for families with not just housing but case management and support. And Outsiders Inn offers low barrier shelter and outreach, especially if traditional programs feel out of reach. These aren't perfect solutions, and I know the wait lists and rules can be frustrating, but they are lifelines, and you don't have to navigate it all alone. So whether you're someone who wants to give or someone who needs support right now, my message is the same. Compassion matters. We're all human. And the more we see each other that way, the closer we get to building a community where no one is left outside. I've shared a lot in this video, some of it pretty personal, some of it heavy, and I know homelessness can feel like an overwhelming issue, one that's too big to fix. But here's what I've learned. Change doesn't start with one massive solution. It starts with small acts of compassion, repeated over and over until they add up. For me, this is more than just a talking point. It's my story. I grew up in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, always right on the edge of housing insecurity. I watched my dad live on the streets for years, and even now, with other family members who have gone through it, I carry that experience with me every single day. And today, I'm in this completely different chapter of my life, working as a realtor, helping families find homes of their own. That contrast isn't lost on me. It reminds me constantly of how fragile stability can be and how precious it is when you have it. So when I talk about homelessness, I'm not speaking from statistics or headlines. I'm speaking from lived experience, from a place of knowing how close any of us could be to losing the thing we take for granted, a safe place to call home. If there's one thing I hope you can take away from this video, it's that homelessness is not about character flaws. It's about circumstances, systems, and sometimes just plain bad luck. And behind every statistic is a person, someone's parent, someone's child, someone's neighbor. So my ask is simple. Lead with compassion. Give when you can. Volunteer when you can. Smile when you can. And never forget that housing is more than real estate. It's dignity, it's stability, it's the foundation for everything else in life. I'm Jasmine, your Vancouver, Washington Realtor extraordinaire. Thank you for taking the time to watch, to listen, and hopefully to see this issue a little differently. And now, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think our community could be doing differently when it comes to homelessness? Whether it's more housing, better mental health services, or simply treating people with more kindness, what change do you think would make the biggest impact? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I can't wait to hear your perspective, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!